It was Angela's first night, working the graveyard shift at St. Catherine's Hospital. A nurse fresh out of school, she was both nervous and excited about working in the ICU. The corridors were quiet, almost unnaturally so, with only the occasional beep of a heart monitor or the soft murmur of a patient's restless sleep breaking the silence. Angela had just finished checking on Mr. Harris, a man in his 70s who had been admitted after a severe stroke. He was stable for now, but his prognosis was uncertain. She sighed and rubbed her eyes, trying to shake off the exhaustion that was beginning to settle in. She had several more hours to go before her shift ended. As she turned to head back to the nurse's station, she noticed a faint light coming from one of the rooms further down the hall. Puzzled, she walked toward it, her footsteps echoing softly against the linoleum floor. Room 412. The door was slightly ajar, the light from the bedside lamp spilling into the hallway. Angela frowned. She was sure she had turned off the light earlier. Maybe one of the other nurses had come in. She pushed the door open a little wider and stepped inside. The room was empty, the bed neatly made. The light flickered slightly, casting strange shadows on the walls. Angela reached out to turn it off, but as she did, she felt a cold breeze sweep past her, rustling the curtains by the window. Angela shivered and looked around, her heart beating faster. The window was closed, but the room felt unusually cold, like someone had left the air conditioning on full blast. She frowned and walked over to the thermostat, checking the temperature. It was set to a comfortable 72 degrees. A soft rustling sound behind her made her spin around. The curtains were moving again, but there was no breeze, no draft. Angela took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. The shadows on the walls seemed to shift and change, forming strange shapes that danced and twisted in the flickering light. Angela blinked, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The shadows seemed almost human, figures standing just out of reach, their faces blurred and indistinct. "Hello?" Angela called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone there?" There was no answer, just the faint whisper of the curtains moving and the steady beep of the heart monitor in the room next door. Angela's pulse quickened, her senses on high alert. She took another step back, reaching for the door. Just as she was about to leave, she heard it, a faint voice, barely more than a whisper. "Please, don't go." Angela froze, her hand hovering over the doorknob. The voice was soft, almost pleading, and seemed to come from right behind her. She turned slowly, her heart racing. Standing in the corner of the room was a woman. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were hollow and sunken. She was dressed in a hospital gown, her hair hanging in limp, tangled strands around her face. Angela's breath caught in her throat. "Oh my God," she whispered. Are you okay?" The woman didn't respond, just stared at Angela with a look of desperation in her hollow eyes. She raised a hand, pointing toward the bed. Angela followed her gaze and gasped. Lying on the bed, half covered by the thin hospital blanket, was the same woman, her body still and lifeless, her eyes wide open and staring at nothing. Angela backed up, her mind reeling. She turned to run, but the door slammed shut in front of her, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. She whirled around to face the woman again, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you want?" she cried, her voice shaking. The woman's lips moved, but no sound came out. She took a step forward, her eyes fixed on Angela's, and pointed again at the bed. Angela felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced at the bed, at the woman's lifeless body, and then back at the ghostly figure in front of her. You're dead," Angela whispered, the words catching in her throat. The woman nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears. She pointed to herself, then to Angela, her hand trembling. Angela's eyes widened as the realization hit her. No, please, no." The woman nodded again, more urgently this time, and pointed to Angela's chest. Angela looked down and gasped. Her own body was lying on the floor, her face pale, and her eyes closed. She reached out to touch herself, but her hand passed right through like smoke. She looked up at the woman, her eyes filling with tears. I don't understand." The woman stepped closer, her expression softening. She reached out and took Angela's hand in hers, her touch cold as ice. "Come with me," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible. "There's room for one more." Angela wanted to scream, to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She felt herself being pulled forward, toward the bed, toward the lifeless body that lay there. As she got closer, the room grew darker, the shadows closing in around her. She could feel the cold creeping up her spine, feel her body growing numb. And then, just as she was about to touch the bed, everything went black. The next morning, the day shift nurse found Angela's body lying on the floor of room 412, her eyes wide open and staring at nothing. The room was cold, unnaturally so, and the curtains fluttered gently as if stirred by a breeze no one could feel. The nurse crossed herself and whispered a prayer, closing Angela's eyes with a trembling hand. As she turned to leave, she thought she heard a faint whisper, like a breath of wind through the empty room. But when she turned back, there was nothing there, just the stillness of the empty room and the silence of the grave.